Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Meryl, brilliant to have you here. So, first off, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
Hello, Alan, and thank you so much for having me. It's genuinely a pleasure to be here. So, I'm Meryl, and I am the founder of a startup called Results of Kindness. And essentially, what we want to do, and it's a tripartite organization, but really, we want to create a world more livable through kindness, starting from workplaces. So, by increasing organizational profitability, productivity, and competitive advantage through kindness, we see a treasure chest of results. And some of the things that we see is increased retention, better talent management, and nurturing, but also being able to future proof your business in a very manic and unstable political and socio-economic environment. So it's not something when people tell me, oh, it's kindness, this is quite new. This is humanity's greatest strength that is being returned in the form of a results-based concept or shape in the form of a consultancy, training, and keynotes firm that is Results of Kindness. And it's been launched a few months ago. But I truly believe, and when people ask me, why kindness? I've been writing, living, and advocating for kindness for a very long time. So when I say, people introduce me and they say, what's your title? I say kindness advocate, because it's something that I have been advocating for such a long time. And then at the age of 27, I realized that this is my soul mission, which everyone has. And this is mine. And I hope to do justice and do good through it, through Results of Kindness. So
Well,
that's
that's
me.
that's that's great to hear. And what I find most intriguing is the combination of the value of kindness, which, it's probably of all the values, kindness is probably the poster child. It's kind of always gets great traction and people are supported, obviously. But then you've matched that with these hard measures of return on investment and profitability and businesses being successful. And I think that that's a must. And if I think about a parallel, actually, that's just popped into my mind is the whole area of well-being, because this was in a similar place, probably, I don't know, 10 years ago. Everybody saying, yeah, of course, it's a good thing. But it wasn't until one of the major consultancies did a return on investment study on it that it really started to gain traction, because then leaders in organizations could kind of understand that it was a valuable return on investment that they were generating by investing in this space. And it strikes me that kindness is a little bit further behind than well-being is, but it will follow the same path. What do you think about that?
I surely hope so. And I think that's one of the things that I admire about you so much is that when we met, Alan, and I think I said this before, people on their entrepreneurship journey, they meet a lot of blocks, and they meet a lot of people that they don't essentially align with. But I think that your work and the work that I aspire to do, and I'm very much inspired by you, is the systemization of kindness, because kindness does have an image problem, and that's why people don't marry the two together immediately. I think people, if we look at the right opposite of kindness, which I believe is narcissism and sociopathy and psychopathy, we actually marry success and narcissism together quite quickly, because there's a lot of research that puts the two together, that narcissists are engaged in better self-preserving behaviors. They exhibit sort of higher than average intelligence than the rest of us. And we are attracted to those traits as partners and as friends. But if you look at kindness, kindness has always been there as humanity's greatest strength. But because it's so under appreciated, and it's because it's taken for granted, it's never been brought out into the light. And I think that the return on kindness, the return on investment that comes from kindness is something new And it's something that I'm glad that it's being embraced, but I think it'll take some time to dismantle some of those preconceptions and some of those stereotypes that's associated with kindness. I think it was Dumbledore that said that people never fail to underappreciate and underestimate kindness. And I think that really brings it together, because it's the bread and bone of the world. We're raised on kindness. An act of kindness saves people daily. It's the kindness and the generosity of our parents that bring us into this space of abundance and ability. So I think that it's something that's taken for granted, and therefore it's not seen in the same way, but it is perhaps the most muscular superhuman strength that humanity has. And I'm glad that it's having its day in the spotlight. But I do think it'll take some time. But once we do bring out some of that public knowledge on it, what I find is when I meet people, when I talk to them about the business, I talk for about 10 minutes and they talk for about 50, because the moment that it's introduced to them in the way that it's supposed to be, in its most legitimate, truest definition, the human being has this innate ability to receive and understand what it does. So I think people just need to remember kindness, not so much be introduced to it for the first time and then see those results.
Yeah, that's a great overview of kindness, and the odds are stacked against us, but kindness is in the deck. So let's see. Um, so I'm tipping the deck out. I'm going to give them a bit of a shuffle, and then I'd like you to tell me how many piles I should make in front of me, please.
I'm seeing the number 3.
Okay. And these are different sizes of piles. So would you like the one on my left, the one on my right, or the one in the middle?
Middle,
The
please.
middle. Okay. And so we've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 17 cards. So a number between 1 and 17, please.
My favorite number is 10, actually, because my favorite Doctor is the 10th Doctor. So let's just go with that. If any Doctor Who fans are listening.
Okay. So what do you think of the card that you've chosen? Perseverance.
This is, I mean, of course, kindness would have been the most wonderful coincidence that there could be. This is really interesting, Alan, because when I was developing ROK, I think we had this conversation. I was working in a very toxic work environment that was the opposite of everything that I was campaigning for as part of the startup. And I think before I embarked on this journey, I was met with an onslaught of unkindness from a lot of people and a lot of situations. And I really had to persevere, as the card says, in this mission. And it was almost as if I was being sort of tested by the universe or God, as to the validity of this mission, that when things get hard, do you hold on to your values? So I think it's wonderful that of all cards, persevere came up.
It doesn't surprise me because there have been so many, spooky situations in the choice of card by people. There's one that's the standout for me because so we did what we've just done in terms of a process. The person I showed the card, which was protection of the environment, and the person said, "Have you just played a trick on me?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, last night when I was thinking about this call today, I wondered whether we would draw the card protection of the environment." and and then another one was with it was a values jam with a bunch of teenage school children in Kenya, and they chose the card learning. I mean, you can't make it up, right? So perseverance, that's obviously a really important part of your journey. So the first question is, what does perseverance mean? And what does it look, sound, and feel like?
Well, I think firstly, there is, I just wanted to acknowledge that there's certainly some kind of beautiful magic in those cards. Um, and I think that secondly, there is no such thing as coincidence. We're in synchronicities all the time. And to answer your question, what does perseverance mean? I think it's almost Gatsby-esque in the definition that I'll give. It's to see a green light that no one else can see, that you do not give over to anything, and you preserve that mission, or you preserve that end, irrespective of circumstance, irrespective of disappointment, irrespective of discouragement, as long as you believe in the innate moral, intrinsic value of what it is that you're persevering towards. And so I think this, again, it brings it slightly into kindness, because sometimes when people are kind from a place of unhealthy attachment, or to further some kind of self-fulfilling goal, perhaps to meet a certain need, or to perhaps receive something in return, it leads to burnout, and it leads to resentment, and it also leads to disbelief in kindness altogether, because people say, well, one of the biggest barriers to kindness is well, I was kind, I didn't get anything back, or I didn't get what I wanted. And it's almost the same as well, I think, in the West, and I think in the East now as well. We do work for the sake of work. We persevere for the sake of perseverance, because we're so detached from that moral compass, or that intuition that's guiding us to, is this the right decision or not? So I think that perseverance itself is, or the thing that breaks perseverance, or the thing that isn't perseverance, is to mindlessly work towards a goal or an end without considering the entire picture of it. And I think that true perseverance is the opposite of that. It's choosing a mission, it's choosing an end, and it is being faithful to that end, and learning through that end, and being loyal and committed to that end, as long as one truly believes that the journey is worthwhile. I think that's something that we sometimes lose sight of that, I would say, in all the noise, in all the clutter. We go towards things for the sake of going towards things. And what does it look,
Well,
feel?
before you go on
Yeah.
to the look, feel, and sound like, I just want to comment on what you were just talking about there in terms of getting caught up with the means and forgetting the end. Because a book that I'm co-authoring at the moment involves a contribution from a person from a different country all over the world. Okay, and there's a question which is, what value would you like to show up strongly in the future, and why? And this is somebody who said this, and this is weird because I only received this yesterday. So Mohammed's favorite core value is honesty. He believes that a person who is truly honest in heart and holds firm to this principle will not only benefit in society, but also earn the favor of Almighty Allah. Such a person, he urges, has nothing to lose by avoiding short-term gains, and is instead focused on long-term benefit, which I think is what you said in a different way. Is that right?
Yeah, and another coincidence. I think that was beautiful, Mohammed. There is, I think, to add to that, there is a verse in the Quran that says that there is no reward of goodness greater than goodness itself. And so when something is innately good, it doesn't mean that by doing good, that's great. End of it, you just do it for the sake of it. No, it's because in itself is this abundant spring well of good that flows from it, because of its source, because of its matter.
Yeah.
So I think that's true perseverance is perseverance in the good. True perseverance in evil, or in the futile, is self-flagellation, I would say.
And I know we're going to move on to the more metaphoric part of the question, but I do have a question as well for you, because as I was listening to you describe perseverance, the thought occurred to me about the difference between perseverance when it's just stubbornness and just carrying on for the sake of it, versus what you were more describing, which was this great strength and sense of inner belief, which just carries you forward in spite of everything. But I was kind of struggling to explore what the difference between the two of those were. So, what's your take on that?
Do you mean the difference between stubbornness and doing things for the sake of it, and
Yeah, so blind stubbornness, just carrying on, versus this perseverance, which is more grounded and centered, rather than just doing it for the sake of it kind of thing. Maybe I've just answered the question myself. It's about the sense of feeling from the inside rather than just doing it for no reason, right?
no, it's a great question, and I think there is a it's and I think with many things in the emotional intelligence arena, there's always these subtleties that create the biggest divide between these sub definitions. So I think that there is an element of stubbornness when it comes to believing in a mission that no one else sees. And we see this so profoundly with entrepreneurs, that they have this vision, they have this dream that very few people share, and their stubbornness is what allows them to reach their goal. But I think that the difference between the two is the true value and the true coherency of the thing that is being pursued. So something that I don't know why this came up as an example, probably because I was spending time with my cousins and they love these, young American shows, these teen, boarding schools in LA and things. And there's a scene where the guy is clearly not interested in the girl, and the girl just keeps trying, and she gets more and more sort of she makes him more and more uncomfortable, and her tactics become more and more illogical as time passes because it's a futile exercise. So I think something that I see a lot in society, if we come away from the American context, is that, for example, people continue to move in the same way that they had before, but their goals are different now. And I think that a lot of people really struggle with that self-reflection, which was what separates these two together. So if you are, for example, you want to become a professor, let's say, and being a professor is about engaging and being open to the fact that people may not agree with you, that you will be required to be held accountable, that you are essentially sort of employed by your students in a way. You do have to maneuver around their schedules, and you do have to be forgiving. Now, let's say this person comes from a very ego-driven background and they've always been treated very well. So they've come from, let's say, a place of authority or a position or a job of authority where people haven't really questioned them. And they've been raised in a way, or they've been raised in an environment where people don't really sort of question or require a lot of accountability from their elders or from their superiors. They want to study and they want to do a PhD. They may do really well in the PhD, but without the self-reflection, without thinking about the meat of the matter, which is, if I can be as brilliant as I can gather all the contacts that I can to become a professor. I can surround myself with professors. I can do all this PhD research. I can invest all this money. I can say no to my friends. I can do all of this perseverance. But when I get to the final stage and my students are saying you're 20 minutes late and we're not very happy, and you walk out the room, there's something about missing the mark. And it's really the same about the American example, is how valuable and truly worthwhile, divorced of my desires and divorced of my wants and divorced of my comforts, is my mission and the thing that I'm persevering? Is it coherent? Is it fruitful? Does it arise to an end that is valuable not only for me, but for the world entire? Does it make sense? And I think that's the difference. You do need stubbornness, but I do think that some people carry on or keep trying for the sake of trying and don't stop for a moment to meet themselves in the mirror and ask themselves, is this the right thing for me and for others?
And there's something else about what you've just described, which is perseverance with a view from the inside rather than perseverance with an external view. So, a lot of people might listening to this might be thinking about, oh, a situation when I persevered, this thing happened and this other thing happened, but I got through it. When I think of perseverance, I almost find myself hearing that circumstance is just what it is at this moment in time, and it might not necessarily be the same tomorrow. So why should I stop doing what I'm doing? Because, just because, for instance, maybe you're not going to be realizing success today because of a certain situation. Well, that doesn't mean to say that that situation is going to be maintained forever. And so, of course, you continue. The environment within which you find yourself at this moment in time is kind of just a passing phase, right? And it's not as relevant as this deep inner drive that is taking you forward on your mission.
I think something that you said that really sort of a word came into my mind is humility. And I think really, and I think I gave quite a lengthy explanation, but I think you said it really well. The difference between the two, really, if I can not change my mind, but perhaps summarize, is humility. Because there you've acknowledged, Alan, that circumstances do change, that tomorrow does not have the same fabric of today, and vice versa. But I think it's about pursuing in that mission, but also being so objective and so removed from the ego that one is able to change their end according to what is right and what works and what doesn't. So I think perseverance, I think it comes from this place of objectivity, this place of humility, this place of being able to be malleable with what it is that you want to achieve and being open to that. So yes, circumstances can be different. You have to invest in tomorrow, but I think that true perseverance, and I think that's what creates success in some and perhaps not others, is the ability to see, the ability to start off perhaps the journey with a mission of self-interest, but for that to transform and become the true mission. And so understanding that what you set out to do may not be what you end up doing. And the difference between the people who, for example, someone said, I don't know, it's a very, very famous quote that says that it's almost like you're punished for what you get. You do get exactly what it is that you want. And that can either be a curse or a blessing, because people who are so rigid in their self-interest and their determination, they can create chaos. They still get what they want, what they intended for. They still reach that goal. They still get what it is that they want, but at the detriment of themselves and of others and their future. But those who persevere truly are the ones who, for example, like I set out to be a human rights lawyer. Now I'm really starting again with this venture, and I don't know where it's going to be in 5 years, because one was from a place of stability and perhaps even ego, that it would be nice to be called, a lawyer, and coming from that kind of a world where, from a subculture where labels are important. But now throwing myself into this deep end where it is a very tough climb. But knowing that if I had not done the self-reflection, perhaps I would have become a human rights lawyer and enjoyed the stability and the comfort and the consistency that comes with that. But perhaps it wouldn't have led me to this source, to this quite unique path. And I think that's really the difference, is this malleability and humility that leads you to the greater end of perseverance rather than the limited one that you set out to gain.
Yeah. I think what you're describing is the way in which it's maybe quite easy to become confused between the means and the end. You know, how often do we hear people saying, well, the reason I work so hard is because I want my family to be happy. But actually, I've known people that have then worked really hard for a whole career and missed their kids growing up, for instance. So they're kind of focusing on the means, but forgetting the reason why they're doing that, which was the end, and missing that in some cases. Okay, so let's go to the more metaphoric part of the question. I'm sorry for delaying that. There were a couple of things there that I wanted to explore. So, what does perseverance look, sound, and feel like?
Perseverance, it doesn't have, in terms of a shape, it's sort of the middle between sort of sharp edges and softness and roundness, and it's a union between the two. It's almost it looks like water. I think Bruce Lee said this, because water takes the shape of anything that it occupies. And I think perseverance and water is this source of great destruction and great strength and great movement and nourishment. But it can also be deeply gentle and quite submissive and take a secondary role in many settings. And so when we were talking about this malleability and humility, water is deeply humble and it's deeply honest and it's transparent, because with perseverance, you cannot hold on to anything too tightly. You cannot be heavy in pursuing something. And by heavy, you cannot have too much of ego. You cannot have these very strong beliefs about the self to be able to truly persevere. Because if we look at people who have overcome the most difficult of things in life, if we look at, for example, one of the countries that I'm from is Afghanistan, the way that Afghan people have left their homeland, migrated to hundreds, 100 countries, and been able to persevere and to adapt and to learn the language as fluently as the locals in a very short amount of time, to be able to integrate, to be able to contribute. They could not hold on to the fact that, oh, you know, everything has been destroyed, everything has stopped, you know, we will not start again, we will not integrate, we will not hand ourselves over to life, we will not let our spines bend, we will actually force life to bend for us. And so I think that's what perseverance looks like. It looks like water, because water can be sharp, it can be jagged, but it can also be deeply soft and malleable and allowing. And what it feels like, perseverance feels like it has just enough weight to it to keep us, to maintain a spine, to maintain a strength. But it feels remarkably light and almost like it's evaporated. It's this lightless thing that has something that carries at a very small center, weighted center, but the rest of it is very, very much winged and without hold. And looks, feels, and
Sounds
what
like.
was that? Sounds like. It sounds like conviction and hope and belief. I almost think if perseverance spoke, it would be an honorable, committed, kind voice, because it has to listen to achieve its mission. It cannot be arrogant or it cannot be sort of, like a tunnel. It cannot be tunnel visioned or think in a tunnel. And I think more than anything, it sounds happy. It sounds joyful because it has something to live for, which I think people tend to lose after a certain time, after the adult world takes them over. I think I see this as an adult, as a sort of a Peter Pan adult at 27. It's very hard to hold on to your dreams after graduation, or even before that. We see that sort of decline of the human soul's vivaciousness. But I think perseverance is a deeply joyful, Gatsby-esque character, but with perspective and with hold.
Well, I just want to thank you for the thoughtfulness that you dived into that metaphor part of the answer, because that was wonderful, and it's so much more sophisticated and deeply thought through than what came to my mind. So let me share those with you just to give you a bit of a contrast to what you just described. So what it looks like to me is effort. So it's a bit of a strain. But actually, when it comes to the feeling, it is a satisfying strain. So the only equivalent that I can think of is when you've played sport and exerted yourself, and afterwards, yes, you're tired, but it's a really good feeling tired rather than exhausted, completely exhausted and not wanting to feel like that again. And what does it sound like? I can hear that kind of heavy breathing of when you're actually going a bit further than you might be comfortable with, but it is so strongly motivated that it feels good doing that. Yeah, so a contrast to your far more sophisticated, deeply thought through metaphors. So let's move to something very practical now. And I'd like to ask you, where have you noticed a lack of perseverance?
In myself or the world?
It can be either yourself or other people that you've observed or other people with you. It can be any context.
Before I answer, I just wanted to say that I think that sometimes it's very easy, or perhaps for me, I live very much in the soul. But I think that one thing I genuinely appreciate is just how in the world your perspective is, because that is what we need. That's what we're trying to do, and we have a shared mission of kindness. And I think that sometimes being very angelic and conceptual can actually take people too far into the dream world. And I think I loved what you said, is that and I wrote a poem a long time ago, and I said, blessed are those who have something to live towards, who are more alive in their sleepfulness than us in our overcharged rest. And I think there's something about having something to live for, that no matter how tired you get, or no matter how disappointed you feel, or no matter how many setbacks you have, it keeps one alive. It keeps the heart alive to keep going. And I just think that was really beautiful and sophisticated in its reach. And I think to answer the question about lack of perseverance, people are so, actually, that begins with judgment. I think what I'll say is that a lack of perseverance that I see in the world, and I think if we look at it from workplaces, it's a very interesting example. People fail to persevere in the most basic investments of humanity that make the biggest impact. And I think that we very quickly, we think of the most sophisticated or ornate solution to very simple problems. Because much of the time, and something that I've realized is this, For me, it's the opposite. So I was doing quite advanced maths at the age of 7, but I struggled to tie my shoelaces. So for some reason, perhaps my brain is wired for the difficult and sort of collapses in on itself when it comes to easy things. So when it came to things like self-reflection and healing and self-development, I found it much easier, but I found the other things quite hard. I think for other people, for the majority of people, it's the opposite. So, for example, they will invest hundreds and hundreds of pounds to go to an away day to learn about well-being and boundaries and, for example, a work-life balance. But the managers won't sit and reflect on the anonymous survey results and feedback that they've received, that actually they made several people cry, that they operate in favoritism, that they instigate office politics, and they are responsible for a lot of these exclusionary practices. And that is really the core of, probably the core of the issue of many, many problems that we have today on a global, social, and individual scale, is that we will seek to do anything but persevere in the most simple of actions that reap the greatest awards. So it's easier to tell your team to work harder or that they need to adapt around your managerial style than it is to take a moment of self-reflection and ask why the ego is rampaging across your work description and the way that you operate. So the lack of perseverance in returning to basic humanity and kindness. And it's the most cost-effective strategy that there is. In relationships, people go and spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds. I shouldn't be saying this as someone who's training as a psychologist. Rather than sit down and ask ourselves to do perhaps the most basic things that our brain has already been telling us to do, why don't we try there rather than reaching out for the external and reaching out for the elaborate? Because it's uncomfortable to take one step, but it's much easier to take 20 steps in a different direction.
It's fascinating listening to you talk about that, because it continues to fascinate me why we over intellectualize so much of our lives rather than just getting on with it and doing it. And I suppose in a professional context, I still feel like an operator at heart. So I used to run businesses with big teams in demanding customer environments. And yes, it's kind of easy to talk about that stuff and to write about that stuff, but it's, excuse the language, bloody hard work to do it. And I remember walking around at the last hotel that I ran, I would make a point of adjusting the cushions on the sofas in the lounge on the way through to the bar, just to make the point to everybody that that's the way they should be. And if somebody had moved them to be out of place, then it was all of our responsibility to put it back to that place, because that's where it needed to be. And it's only with that perseverance that in business as usual that you get really high levels of performance. It's the same with, if you think about world-class athletes, they're a fantastic example of just doing the same over and over, over and over, over and over, and getting a little bit better all the time. And there are so many people that just can't hack that, and they can talk about all of the reasons why you should and all of the strategies that you might employ, but that is a very different world than being able to do it in practice.
Yeah, I think it was wonderful listening to you, and especially the example of the cushion as well. I think about sort of attention to detail. It's about a sense of loyalty and a personalization of the space, which is so important. And I think that when you essentially invest in those small actions, those reap the greatest rewards. But I think a lot of the time businesses miss the mark. They miss the ball altogether because they're focused on other things rather than the building blocks. And I think another example that I had is that, for example, a lack of accountability. So we see this a lot in teams, and also in sort of familial environments as well, and with friends. So let's say someone raises a concern and they say that they have an issue with something, and there is a high amount of evidence that their perspective is right or could be right. Now, most people will essentially engage in a very long battle tactic of slightly gaslighting and deviating and omitting responsibility and omitting accountability, just because there is a probability that their image or their sense of self could be vulnerable to injury in the process. Now, with me, I'm not advocating for this, is that for some reason, maybe innately, I'm not sure, but if someone said something to me about my behavior, the first thing I would think of is, how do I change it? Now, obviously, over time, I learned that sometimes people may say that because they may not have the best interests at heart, because they want to shape your behavior, they want to take over it. But I think that when you come from a place of what can I learn? What can I do? When you invest in building your basic humanity, that approach at the age of 27, I think that has frankly allowed me to learn a lot about myself and has enabled me to walk away from many situations at work or personally, knowing that I have been able to give the very best that I can, because I was able to see it as an opportunity for growth, to see it as an opportunity for change, to see it as an opportunity to go back to the foundation, which is behavior, which is thinking, which is etiquette. And so I think that people, if you think about it, how much of a waste of time is it to engage in this very long joust with someone and say that I have nothing to do with this, and you're making it up, because not only are you weakening the relationship with them, but you're also weakening the relationship within yourself, because you will live a lifetime blind to the things, the barriers that are keeping love and prosperity and success and all those things away from you. Rumi says is that your job is not to search for love, but to break all the barriers that you have that keep love away. And I think love is our basic humanity, and love is our basic, it's our default, it's our abundance, it's our source. So the more we deny ourselves of opportunities of basic self-reflection, the more we deny ourselves. And I think that is what is so difficult. But I think at the same time, it has to be acknowledged that I was struggling to write, actually, Alan. I was struggling I had writer's block for several months. And I realized something, and I wrote it in my journal, I'm happy to share it with you, is that writing is self-confrontation. Self-reflection is self-confrontation. So when we ask people to invest in basic humanity, when we ask, for example, people to be liable for their actions, that requires quite a lot of self-evaluation and self-engagement and self-connection, which is perhaps the scariest thing of all. And that's why we have this kindness deficit in the world, because it's deeply easy to delegate blame and to delegate responsibility than to be able to approximate it within ourselves.
And there's something there about coming back to the topic of perseverance, and the way you described our lives actually requires a lot of perseverance, whereas many people seem to be encouraged, and I think a lot of what we put in place in society actually encourages this even further, is to take a shortcut, not to persevere with life as it should be, and just take those easy options, whatever they might be. Now, in ValuesJam, there's an opportunity for you to ask your own question. So I'd like to invite you to do this now. So starting with who, what, where, when, why, or how, please ask a question that you're curious about perseverance. And it might be something that you already have the answer to, and then please do share that. Or if you prefer, I'll go first and then you can respond.
I'm really curious, actually, and this may be a very far-fetched question, but because we were discussing the role of personality traits on the onset and maintenance of depression and anxiety, I'm also curious if there's anything in the DNA that if there are certain personality traits that you've seen in the richness of experience that you have as an entrepreneur that make people more capable of perseverance than others. So I'm very, very curious about the innate part of it. Because as you said, in the West, and I think, now more and more, because social media is the ultimate comfort and the ultimate distractor, is that we are almost seduced into taking the short route that we inevitably end up paying for quite a bit. Very interesting, Alan. I was cleaning the windows and I missed, and I sort of cut a corner, probably because of tiredness or fatigue or however. And I came back the next day and I had cleaned everything precisely and quite and very meticulously, but that one corner. And that corner had gathered far more dust than it had before I'd cleaned it. And it just goes to show that taking the shortcut, you pay for it later. It always comes back in some way. It never lets you be. If it's clothes, if it's food, if it's emotional processing, it comes back harder with more dust and more to deal with. But I think back to that is that, and back to the question is there something in the DNA? Is there something about certain personality traits that make perseverance easier to withstand or easier to engage with than others?
It's a great question, isn't it? And I guess it comes down to nature and nurture, probably at the end of the day, because some of this stuff might be how we come into the world, and others that we inherit and learn as we go. And you've reminded me, this is a really crazy example. How old would I have been? Probably about 20, probably about your age, actually. So 25, maybe. So maybe a little bit younger. My job was, I was the assistant conference and events manager at a hotel in London. And I had graduated in business administration, specifically focused on hospitality. And so I was a kind of graduate at the beginning of my career. And, all of the reputation that graduates earlier in their career have is well justified, I think, based on my experience, because I was like, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And these people that have been there for years and years, oh no, another graduate. Anyway, one of the bright ideas I had was that it goes to show how long ago this was. We had Cardex boxes in the office with all of the past clients' contact details on these cards. And so I said, do we ever get in touch with these people, our past clients? And I was suggesting that, of course, that would be a brilliant way to get more business. Why would you just not do that? So my then boss, a brilliant Irish guy called Terry, said, well, if you think it's such a good idea, just do it. Which was a fantastic response. So I remember thinking, oh great, he's given me the responsibility for doing this. So I had these boxes of all these addresses and phone numbers, started to telephone people, and got didn't get very far. And there was one example, actually. I remember when I introduced myself and I said, I know that you had a birthday party for whoever their name was a couple of years ago, and I'm just wondering whether you'd consider coming back for another birthday party. And the lady said, "Well, that's not going to be possible because he died last year." I
Oh,
said, "Oh,
that's
okay, I'm really sorry to hear that." Phone down. But I do remember not lasting with that for very long because that was just the circumstance. That was just what was happening around. And my job was to get to the next one and get to the next one and get to the next one. And I think we did get one or two pieces of business from the exercise, but it took a whole lot of effort. Um, and so, what was driving that? I think, in terms of characteristics, resilience, so not being put off by setbacks, I think is something that some people have more innately than others. Um, a belief in what you're doing. So is it worth it? You know, is the juice worth the squeeze?
mm,
Um, and probably then there was a bit of pride at stake as well, actually, because, I'd suggested that this would be a good idea. And so if I was like 2 weeks later, if I was to say, well, I've phoned several hundred people and actually the result is zero, then that wouldn't have felt very good. Um, and thinking back to that example, I I think that was a really fantastic lesson for me in terms of having been through the pain of an exercise, which means that the next time you're faced with a similar situation, you kind of know what it's like. So it's not as difficult second time round. Um, and then just one final example, my youngest son, Sam, when he was about 9 or 10, took tennis lessons. And whenever he went up just 1 point down in a game, he would feel like he's lost. So at that point in his life, he had kind of zero perseverance. But strangely enough, now or later in life, he actually has become quite resilient. And when he wants to achieve something, he really knuckles down and gets done. So, and I don't really know what the transition was from that, oh, just give up when, the smallest setback happens to now. Something must have happened in between, I guess. So that was a bit of a rambling answer. So what did I say? Resilience and commitment and perceived value, I would suggest, are some of the characteristics that drive whether perseverance is strong or less strong. What about you?
what about me? Um, well, I think firstly, you made some really wonderful points. I think the first one was that perseverance can be learned. And I think the example of Sam is a great one, that people can learn, people can transform, people can change. But I think there's something about, because as we were talking about defining perseverance and what it looks and feels and smells like metaphorically, it seems as if as a graduate, you have sustained the same belief that circumstances change, that there doesn't mean that yesterday's disappointments lead to tomorrow's certain disappointments. And I think for me personally, I think also it may be, this is perhaps more of an anthropological social psychological discussion, but I think that it may have something to do with maybe cultural factors as well, that or people who have, for example, have experienced loss or displacement or perhaps rejection or sort of extreme circumstances where things have changed very rapidly and they have not been able to grieve over that and believe that yesterday does equal tomorrow. Something that I have noticed a lot as a second generation child of immigrants is that in our cultures, because there is this great this that the elephant in the room is that there has been a very prolonged history of trauma, of war and displacement, that I think that it creates rigid thinking patterns. And it's that, well, if I have experienced disappointment, then the future also brings disappointment. And I think there must be something, and obviously it's not this very clear binary between people of color and people who aren't, because that just wouldn't be fair. But I think something that I've noticed, and something that's been a real big journey in my life, is believing in the ability for circumstances to change, and that we are not married to this terrible destiny that will always foretell and always bring about negative outcomes. And I think that's something that's just really, that for me, has just been really inspiring hearing you say that. And it's something that I also see in others around me, and something that accompanies that attitude is an easygoing nature. It's the ability to let space and air between yourself and the world, and also in between others as well. So those, for example, like yourself, who believe that circumstances can change, that a future is untouched, and that we can contribute to that, that our efforts are not in vain, it usually has a very strong relationship with another personality trait of hopefulness, of joy, of ease. And I, as someone who doesn't come from a family of entrepreneurship, but it's something that I've seen in quite a lot of entrepreneurs, that it's almost like, they can lose millions and tomorrow wake up and believe that everything is going to be okay again. There's almost this brilliant delusion. I think I came from the world of lawyers, and I think lawyers do tend to be a little bit more, they have to be a little bit more risk averse, because it's a part of the profession. And also academia as well is very risk averse as well. And there's also a sense of pessimism that keeps the industry going. It's pessimism that drives research. Well, we don't believe in that research. That there's something going on here. We need to come again. I think something I've loved about entrepreneurs since I was a child is, you've lost your business, you've lost your house. Why are you smiling? And it was the most incredible thing, because one of my uncles is an entrepreneur. And I remember he very casually, telling us that he would sleep 4 hours a night for the first 15 years of his business. And he wouldn't take his boots off when he went to bed, because he didn't want to waste time.
Wow.
And now he's wonderfully established. But the amount of discomfort and the amount of delusion that you have to be able to believe in that incorruptible Gatsby-esque dream is amazing. And I think that really kind of perhaps answers my question, is that I think that perhaps your parents and how they respond to adversities, and how they respond to changing circumstances, and how do they see things in a fixed way. I mean, children watch, we do. That's why advice is the worst thing that you can give a child. Embody it, because they're looking at you, they're mirroring your responses. And now it all doesn't mean that, for example, like with Sam, those those games still took a hit, but then he transformed. So it doesn't mean that if you are a really joyful, optimistic parent who believes that anything is possible, it doesn't mean that your children will follow suit. But I think that there is something about the developmental stage and cultural attitudes around gain and loss that do have an impact. But I think more than anything, perseverance is created by necessity. And
so a couple of comments on that then. First, parents, I agree wholeheartedly. And you've reminded me of my mum, who had motor neuron disease, and at the early stages, when it was becoming a bit more difficult to walk, I remember how she would still wear high heels to go to the doctor for her appointment, because she wanted to be presentable, and she would persevere. And then on sharing that has just made the other thing go out of my mind, I think. But that's absolutely fine. So, drawing this to a close now, the Values Jam always finishes with the same question, which is, what are you encouraged to do differently about perseverance as a result of our conversation today?
Well, I think that it's very easy to advocate for perseverance, but also feel short of it at times of need, and at times where you can't see the fruits of your labor, being cultivated from the ground. And I think genuinely, Alan, you've given me so much in wisdom and depth and conversation, but particularly when the simplicity, and again, it's about returning back to that basic humanity, those basic steps, reminding me that circumstances change and that tomorrow is an untouched uh, table. It's an untouched, uh, malleable canvas. And I think that's something that I really needed to hear, and really needed reminding of.
Mm. So I'm going to disagree with you slightly, actually, because whilst I agree fundamentally with what you've just said, I think you can help yourself for tomorrow's table as well. So, imagine preparing the cutlery in a room nearby, or making sure that you've got either a nice flower decoration or a candelabra or whatever it is. And it might be that you're putting effort into that today and not actually reaping any return for it today because of circumstance, but actually, as long as you're working, as long as you're sowing the seeds towards what it is you want to achieve, then at some point in time that will bear fruit. So it's kind of, what's it saying? It's saying, yes, today does not determine tomorrow, but actually you can be um, loading the dice in your favor. Is a bit of a crude term, but that's the way that you can look forward to tomorrow and set yourself up for success, perhaps. Um, what am I encouraged to do differently about perseverance? I think it's been a really great reminder for me that it doesn't really matter what situation you find yourself in, because there will be a way through it. And as long as you continue believing in what you believe in, you will be fine. Um, and the other thing I think that I've reinforced today is this disconnection between feedback and emotion. You might have heard the phrase feedback is data. Um, you can get caught up in the that story you were telling earlier about how people respond. There's a helicopter going overhead, actually. Don't know if you could hear that, but there's no need to get caught up in the emotion. Just regard it as data. Why did the person think that? Do I want them to continue thinking that? Do I want to do something different? It's your choice. You're not obliged to do anything different, but use the data and then make the choice. And then the other phrase that somebody I worked with many years ago shared with me, that stayed with me for a long time, is that feedback is a gift. And what we forget when somebody is giving us feedback, particularly when it might be constructively critical, is that they are taking a big risk by giving that feedback, because you might not react very well to it. And so just reminding ourselves that when people are putting themselves at risk by giving that feedback, it's for our benefit, not for theirs, and should be treated accordingly. And that's got nothing to do with perseverance, but just came to mind, so I wanted to share. So, Meryl, this has been it's been a fantastic not beginning of the day, but it's the morning here still, and it's set me up for the rest of the day. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I could go on